Well, welcome back. If you're coming back from being with us in previous VIP chats, I'm Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation. And if you're new, welcome to VIP chat. This is our chance, just while we're all a little bit out of our normal routine, a little bit stuck at home, this is our chance to be able to connect, talk about issues that matter, hopefully feel like we get some additional sort of education on what's going on in the world, and in some cases, get to kind of connect and interact with somebody that maybe we wouldn't ordinarily. So this has been an awesome opportunity. If you haven't been with us up until now, we've spoken with some state legislators like Senator Newman and Delegate Byron and Delegate LaRock. We've had some awesome educational moments where Michael Maybach taught us about the value of the Electoral College and why the National Compact would be disastrous for Virginia. We spent some time last week with Sherry Britt. Sherry Britt is the individual who was arrested, or I shouldn't say arrested, criminally cited outside of her abortion facility. She was coaching, speaking with, counseling women. She has a mobile ultrasound unit. And somehow, even though abortion is an essential service in these moments, apparently the ultrasound that is until July 1 required by law, apparently that was not considered essential. So she was out there with her ultrasound unit and got a criminal citation. We were thrilled at the Family Foundation to come alongside. It's not fully announced yet, but we have formed a new legal center, a law center called Founding Freedoms Law Center. And we were able to come alongside National Christian Foundation and be able to join them to help get her the right representation. As we know, her services are in fact essential, and particularly if you're going to leave an abortion center open and she's providing an ultrasound free of charge, it's even more essential. So I do have an exciting update on that chat we had with her last week, which is last week and this week, we actually had the judge respond and actually nullify or sort of dissolve her citation. So we had our first victory with our Founding Freedoms Law Center. So that's been very exciting. Obviously, we don't want to be in court in the first place. The reason we're founding this legal center is because we feel that more and more in the state that we live in this Commonwealth of Virginia, under blue representation, under liberal control, we are finding that we think we're going to be finding ourselves often on the wrong side of the law, not because we've done something wrong, but because our values are not flexible, that we are not going to change who we are as people of faith in many cases, simply because we have a governor who doesn't want our faith to be practiced anywhere in the public square. So we think, unfortunately, there are going to be tremendous numbers of new cases where we're going to have to challenge all these new laws that they've put in place, particularly the non-discrimination laws, much like you saw Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood, where you had entities that had to fight having to pay for abortifacients. We expect that in Virginia, many entities will have real issue with the fact that in their insurance plans, they're going to have to pay for transgender surgeries starting July 1. That's an example of something that's going to violate the tenet of certainly the Catholic Church and many others who have all sorts of people they employ and that they give insurance to. They're going to have huge issues with this. So them and many, many others. So that's why we felt the need to get this Founding Freedom Center going. And so all this to say, we're excited to have our first victory under our belt, and it very much tied in with last week's VIP chat. So pretty awesome. She's an awesome individual, and we're thrilled for her that she can continue. And some of you, this is kind of a great lead into the other thing I wanted to kind of mention here. Some of you have seen that this kind of an arrest, this kind of a criminal citation, is not unique to Sherry. That we actually saw it with somebody a little bit more famous. Maybe you know the Benham brothers. The Benham brothers are individuals who we first got to know because they had a show on HGTV, and they were essentially told that their show is not valid anymore because they didn't want to glorify homosexual relationships as part of their show. And when they kind of laid down that law, they found that HGTV no longer wanted them. So that's how we first got to know them. And then we found that David Benham actually just recently got arrested outside of an abortion center for simply sharing and counseling with women who were entering. All of these folks are finding themselves on the wrong side of these executive orders dealing with lockdown. And the transition that I wanted to make with this is that we are going to get the opportunity to hear from him and have him tell his story in our upcoming simulcast. So that's kind of the last big announcement I want to make, is just that on Monday, we are going to have our first ever really exciting simulcast. We've never done one of these simply because we've always been able to do in-person events. We've been able to be with you, but we're not in this moment. And so due to the recent COVID situation, we had to cancel 3 regional spring fundraising receptions that usually help us actually raise over $100,000 to help fund the work that we do for our fiscal year ends June 30th. And so those are big events for us normally, and we love seeing you, but we couldn't. So we're hosting our first live benefit simulcast on Monday, June 1st. It's going to be at 1 p.m. So mark your calendars now. You are going to want to be a part of this. I'm getting really excited about this. It is the perfect opportunity, not just for you to attend, but for you to invite everyone to attend for free, right? So sometimes our events are sponsors only, or it's a gala and it's got a ticket price. This is amazing speakers for free. Now, that's not to say that it's not an event that is intended to fund our budget. So we have some sponsors. We'd love for you to sponsor if you're interested in that. There are some unique things for sponsors. We are really looking forward to a special time for people who donate to this, to our work through this benefit. We're going to do a special time in advance talking with Congressman Dave Bratt. Former congressman. We're sad that he's a former congressman, but Dave Bratt was our congressman in the 7th District of Virginia. He's also an economics professor over at Liberty now. And we want to talk to him about 2 things. We've sort of put 2 things in front of him. One, how is the federal government handling this? What does he think about what's going on at the federal level with regards to COVID? And then 2, maybe the economic sort of situation. Our simulcast is about redeeming the crisis, and we're going to talk about how conservative values really evidence themselves in these moments, how we see how important it is that we can, that we are able to rely on the value of human life, that how important capitalism is, how important the family is in this moment. So that's what the simulcast is going to be all about. So we're going to start with an event for sponsors ahead of the event around noon with Congressman Dave Bratt, and we also might have just gotten word, it looks like, that Dr. Ben Carson will be a part of that time as well. So it's a very special time just for sponsors. And then at 1 o'clock starts our simulcast for everyone else. You're going to love this. I've gotten a sneak preview of some of the comments, and Dr. Jim Daly from Focus on the Family is going to start us off. Wow, does he have an awesome presentation for us about this moment that we're in. Just a wise man on these issues. And then we're going to have a presentation also from John Stonestreet of Colson Center. Many of you know him. Love the work that they do there. We're going to have a presentation on socialism and why we're getting glimpses of what happens when the supply chain gets interrupted and all of a sudden people start talking about things like government rationing. We saw grocery stores rationing because they had to, but what happens when the government steps in and says, some for you, but not for you, and all of that. And we just really, I think, are in this moment realizing how important it is to help our system thrive in capitalism and not let the left continue to drive us towards a system of socialism. So we're going to have Stella Morbido from the Federalist speak about that. And we also have R.J. Snell talking about the value of human life. He's Witherspoon Institute, Culture of Life, and just fantastic thinking about what these conversations we've been having about what happens when ventilators are short, and we start thinking about maybe we can't save everybody. And we heard some really horrific sort of comments about instead of preserving the vulnerable and the elderly, we heard some comments that were really kind of horrifying, but revealed where we are as a society. That kind of said things like, well, you know, they've had their life. I mean, just really a chance for us to zone in and talk about how important it is to value human life. So we are super excited about this lineup. You will be too. Again, it's our benefit simulcast Monday at 1 o'clock for the general public. Invite your friends. If you haven't seen it in an email from us, it's on our familyfoundation.org website. I'll have Catherine put that website up on in the chat for us right now. But you guys will want to be here, and you will want to have told your friends. You'll wish that you had passed this around. So it's there. And then if you want to sponsor, reach out to us. We'd love to have you part of that special sponsors group that can start us out in that simulcast. So you can either reach us through the website if you want to be a sponsor, or you can connect to Marie at the Family Foundation. Her email is just marie@familyfoundation.org if you want to be a sponsor to be part of that special time with Congressman Bratt and what appears to be possibly also Dr. Ben Carson. So awesome opportunity coming up. I'm also going to very briefly highlight next week's speaker, and then we're going to get on with our program with Congressman Ben Cline. I know you're all excited about him, so I'll make this as I sort of wrap up my comments. Next week, we are going to have someone that I know well, but you might not know well, but you want to. And that is a guy named Joseph Backham. He is with the Colson Center, but more specifically, his background, just FYI, is that he used to do my job in Washington State. Hard place to do my job, but specifically, the reason we're going to have him on is because he created an awesome product or program called What Would You Say? We've put a slide up here on the screen about it, but what his passion is and what he's been doing for the Colson Center is creating this What Would You Say? And it takes the issues that are difficult for all of us sometimes to know how to communicate with our friends and neighbors and simplifies them for us. And they have like 33 videos on their website that are short. I mean, like 3 to 5 minutes. And they hit kind of 3 bullets that are easy to remember on the issues that are so hard sometimes to know how to bring a liberal around to our understanding. Things like, transgenderism, things like, well, abortion, you obviously you want to have abortion in the cases of rape, so we have to have it legal. How do we answer these things? And Joe is just a creative mind, and you will be so excited about the creativity behind these videos, and we just want to introduce this to you. So we're excited. Next week, that's basically what we're going to have doing, and you will want to be a part of that as we sort of draw towards a close of our lockdown moment that we're all kind of have been in since really March. So we're going on multiple months at this point. So anyway, all that to say. So we've been having a little bit of technical difficulty with Congressman Cline. So I am going to have Todd come join us, and we'll see if Congressman Cline has been able to get in the loop here. Let's see. Do we see that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It may be that we have to unmute him and allow him to speak, but we wouldn't be able to share his screen.
Okay. All right. Let's see if that's an option. I'm surprised we've gone 9 weeks without tremendous difficulty technologically. That's actually been surprising to me that we've gotten this far.
It is amazing, yeah, especially considering we haven't been working on these until this moment. So this is, hey, that's a good run without any technical difficulties.
Well, I'll do some introducing of Delegate Cline, and then hopefully we can kind of get some audio here. We knew Delegate Cline before he was a delegate. I mean, before he was a congressman, we knew him as a delegate. He joined the Virginia House of Delegates and years ago, and when he came, he represented an area out in the Harrisonburg Valley area, and it was just fantastic to have someone younger, came out of prosecuting office, just great experience, and just really understood our values, knew our values, articulate them, and he wasn't afraid to stand sometimes kind of on an island. I mean, there were more back then than there are now, people who support our values, but even when we've had majorities that will vote for things that they care about, life and marriage and religious freedom, sometimes we haven't always had people willing to patron a bill or willing to speak out. And Congressman Cline, when he was a delegate, was one of those people. And then he moved into a leadership position as he had been there a little bit longer. He became the head of our conservative caucus. And for those in the audience who don't know what conservative caucus is, it is the group get together on both sides, both chambers, House and Senate. We put them together for strategy and for sort of connection every week during the General Assembly, so that we're making sure that one hand is talking to the other, that the strategy is the same, that people are aware of which bills are crossing over into the other chamber. And it's just a critical function. And Ben ably led that for many years before moving on to the federal government. And so, you know, now we were happy that he ran for Congress and was successful, but we were sad to lose him out of the state legislatures. So let me see if we are, he's there with the audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so at this point, my job is to turn it over to Todd and you, so you all can have a conversation. And I guess we'll just be looking at you, Todd.
I guess so. Congressman, it's great to have you on. Usually we have whoever our guest is and myself on. So unfortunately, for those on the webinar, they're going to have to look at just me. So I do apologize for that. But we're so glad that you're
able.
able
It's going to be a better webinar, Todd. They're going to be
join
much
us.
happier than having to look at me. That's fine.
Well, I know that it's a busy time in Washington. I guess before we kind of get to talking about policy, can you just kind of share with us how you and your family are doing, and how you're staying, what you're doing during this pandemic, and just kind of bring us up to speed.
Thank you for having me, and it's good to be with everybody. I miss my time in Richmond even more acutely now that we're hit by this pandemic, because you want to be home in your district as much as you can be. And right now we're back and forth to DC. But while we're at home, it's a tough time because folks are hurting and businesses are hurting, and people are struggling to make ends meet. Folks are losing their jobs and trying to adjust to this pandemic, and trying to figure out what the facts are, and what's safe and what's not, and what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. We're not getting a lot of leadership out of our governor. So unfortunately, folks are really asking a lot of questions. And I am trying to conduct business, help people access the federal government, the bureaucracy as best we can, businesses accessing some new programs to help them kind of bridge this gap that the pandemic has created, and at the same time trying to spend time with the family, shelter in place a little bit. My wife's still working as an attorney, so I'm home with the kids. We have twin 8-year-old daughters, and I'm their teacher now for second grade, although second grade, school's over, so summer's here, and they're even more glad than normal because now dad's not their teacher anymore. But it's an amazing time to reconnect with the family, trying to find that silver lining in this horrible situation.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of start off with asking you about wearing face coverings. You know, we've read what President Trump and federal agencies are recommending. This past Memorial Day weekend, Governor Northam was in public without a face covering, and not necessarily social distancing either. This week, he issued a policy that Virginians must start wearing face coverings in public beginning tomorrow. What are your thoughts about this? And maybe a follow-up question to that is, how important and challenging is it for politicians to lead by example?
Well, as we all know, the use of masks can be helpful to not protect the user of the mask, unless it's an N95 mask, but to protect others around who might be in a vulnerable population and susceptible to catching COVID if you are not showing symptoms of the virus, but a carrier of the virus. Asymptomatic is what they call it. So to try and, if you're in a situation where you're in close quarters and you're in with a lot of people, you may want to wear a mask. I've always said that folks should wear masks where appropriate. And if I'm, down here in Washington on the House floor voting with 400 of my colleagues, although with proxy voting, that's fewer now. There are fewer Democrats coming to the House floor because they're all home in their districts, but earning a paycheck, and we can get into that as well, the problems with that. But, so we wear masks on the floor, but when I'm outside, I've been pushing for Shenandoah National Park to reopen. You're going hiking, going walking. My kids are anxious to ride their bikes. I'm not going to wear a mask when I'm outside and not within 6 feet of other people. And so, the governor, I think actually his order is counterproductive in many ways, because if the governor encouraged people to wear masks and talked about in some situations it's appropriate to wear masks, then people would listen to that and probably wear masks where appropriate. But when the government and the heavy hand of government comes in and says you must, first of all, I think you do have constitutional issues related to freedom of the ability to decide for yourself whether you are going to wear one or not. It's an issue for the individual to decide. But I do think that the governor was especially hypocritical given his lack of social distancing and his failure to wear a mask just the weekend prior at Virginia Beach. So I think it hurt his ability to encourage, to be a leader, to lead by example. And so I think it's problematic. I also think it's problematic that the enforcement of this Class 1 misdemeanor, and he tried to say it wasn't, but it actually is a Class 1 misdemeanor, is given to the Department of Health. This is the same Department of Health which has had the abysmal record in testing, next to last in the country in testing for coronavirus. And that is hindering our ability to flatten the curve, to get past this pandemic, and to actually reduce the need for masks. So his effort to mandate these masks is a direct result of his administration's failure, his Department of Health's failure to test more, which will help us to flatten the curve, to get past this pandemic and keep people healthy. So it's been a disaster all the way around with this administration, and I just shake my head as I continue to read about the details coming out of Richmond.
You touched on a lot of topics here that I actually have planned to cover, one being the proxy voting, and then the other dealing with the social distancing. And but I guess maybe before we kind of get into some of that, can you just kind of also share your thoughts about President Trump's recent statement that churches are essential, and that his demand that they all be allowed to open?
Absolutely. This president has been focusing on helping Americans to get through this pandemic and making sure that Americans continue to have their rights preserved and protected during this process. It wants to make sure that our First Amendment rights are not infringed. That includes our freedom of religion and our ability to express our faith in the way we choose. And if we want to go to church, in many cases, churches are having outdoor services, and that's fantastic. As for my church, we have had to go to web-based services, and so that's working too. But now that we're reopening, I'm glad that my church is going to start having in-person services. But for those in states where the governors are a little more heavy-handed and are not allowing churches to reopen, I think this is a great statement by the president to clarify that our constitutional rights come first. We want to profess our faith, and we should be able to profess our faith. Faith is an essential part of life, and we should be able to do that as we seek to get past this pandemic.
You also mentioned, maybe before we kind of get into some of the things that Congress is doing to address many of the financial concerns, you mentioned in your statement earlier about flattening the curve. I know some people are probably familiar with this. For those that aren't, could you just kind of clarify that? And then what is Congress trying to do to help achieve those results?
Sure. So flattening the curve is trying to keep the spread of a virus like the coronavirus to a level that does not exceed the ability of your healthcare system um, to handle it, to have the beds available, to have the respirators available, to have the PPE, the masks and the gloves available, and to have the tests available. And at first, we have seen it varies by state, but steep increases in the spread of the virus as we were coming to understand it. And in a place like New York, you did see the curve not flattened, and the virus and the number of infected quickly exceed the ability of the healthcare system to handle it. So you saw people go without respirators or without access to respirators, and nurses and medical professionals without proper PPE. And so in Virginia, one of the things that we have encouraged is to try and shelter in place, and those businesses that did have to make sure that they adhered to the 10 or less in terms of people gathering in places. Those kinds of things helped to flatten the curve, helped to prevent the spread in the initial time, and enabled us to get to a point where it was manageable for our healthcare system. In the initial stages, we're at that point where cases are still going up, total cases, but new cases, the rates of new cases are going down. And while we may have another surge later, maybe around the time flu season comes back in the fall or winter, for now, it's time to examine a reopening process. We've successfully, or to this point, been successfully flattening the curve, and we should be able to reopen, especially in areas, regions like mine, rural areas where you don't have the spread quite as expansive as in Northern Virginia.
You mentioned the impact on the healthcare system, or the idea that trying to flatten this curve in order to provide some relief for our healthcare system. What do you think are some of the noteworthy impacts that this pandemic will have on our healthcare system going forward?
Well, I just was on the phone with a company yesterday that does dialysis, and if you have ever been into a dialysis clinic, up until now, it's been kind of one big room where everybody kind of sits in a bed and gets dialysis treatment in a chair in a bed, kind of next to another person. So you could have 30 or 40 in one room getting dialysis treatment. But now they've had to update me on all of the different things that they've had to change about their operations. So now they have separate rooms for people, and they have separate times for people to come in. People who are not infected with the virus come in at one time. People who may be asymptomatic but test positive come in at another time. People who are symptomatic come in at a different time. So it's been a great lift for our healthcare facilities to have to comply with the changes that are necessary to keep our health system operational, and that's why the federal government has stepped in with support. We've passed several pieces of legislation providing trillions of dollars to not just the public sector but the private sector to help find a vaccine, but also to improve testing, to also improve state and local operations, give them funds for PPE and other types of operations, and to make sure our hospitals and healthcare providers can continue to operate.
Yeah, and that raises a good question. There there have been a number of bills, like you mentioned, that provide some financial assistance for those that are kind of concerned about, the growing debt, how much money is going to be injected into the economy. What is Congress's plan in it? What are the short-term and long-term effects that this could have on the economy?
Well, we have a dual crisis going on right now. We have a healthcare crisis, but we also have an economic crisis as well. And so we have to address them both simultaneously as we seek to flatten the curve, as we seek to develop a vaccine. We have to make sure that we help small businesses make it through this time, because the shutdowns are not meant to last as long as this coronavirus exists, because it's going to be with us for quite some time. Small businesses are going to have to reopen in the middle of this crisis and seek to make a profit in the middle of all of this, and we have to help them through the most critical period when they were shut down or when they were limited to a certain number of people in their business at one time. So now that we're moving past that point, freeing up regulations and requirements on these businesses, helping them to get back on their feet, giving them forgivable loans, which we did in the CARES Act, to keep their employees on staff, to make sure we don't burden our unemployment ranks and drive up unemployment costs for the states and for the federal government and for the small business community. These are all working together. So it's some things are working well. The CARES Act and the PPP program took some tweaking, and we're still tweaking it. Today, we're voting on legislation to remove the 75% employee you have to maintain 75% of your employees to qualify for the loans being forgiven. We're going to remove that because some, like the retailers, the small retailers, don't need certain numbers of employees until, say, Christmas, third quarter, as they start to ramp up for the holidays. So making sure that they can adjust appropriately and still get those loans forgiven, that flexibility is something we're going to do today. But it's still a work in progress. The CARES Act was great. We had another bill, which was almost twice that amount, that Nancy Pelosi wrote herself and passed through on a partisan basis, that also included money for things like National Endowment for the Arts and other things that were unrelated to the pandemic. But we'll take it one bill at a time. That bill is dead in the Senate, and this president said he's going to veto it anyway. We're focusing on direct assistance to businesses and families as part of whatever we can do to help families make it through this process.
Yeah, that actually addresses a question I was going to have about that $1 trillion stimulus package that Speaker Pelosi had and her colleagues there in the House of Representatives had worked up, and it was filled with a lot of liberal items in there, and was going to get you to kind of touch on those and share your thoughts about that. And it's good to hear that the Senate has already put their foot down, but just curious as to what are they trying to slip in there that people might want to know about?
Well, the bailouts for states that have been traditionally mismanaged with regard to either state pensions or other types of states that are running liberal programs that are running deficits. California, Illinois, New York are some examples of states that have failed to do that, failed to be responsible. And so we want to make sure that we're not in the business of bailing out failed state governments. And we want to focus on reimbursing states for addressing this coronavirus crisis. And we're willing to do that. And that's what we did in the CARES Act, but not to just help them address deficits that they may be running due to reduced sales taxes and things like that. We're all facing reduced revenues at the state, local, and federal government levels. We can't just keep operating the same way we've been operating. There are going to have to be reductions in spending, and so states and local governments are just going to have to make adjustments. The federal government's not going to bail that out.
Okay. You mentioned, we'll kind of transition a little bit into some of the procedural things that are happening in the House of Representatives. And you had mentioned the proxy voting. You probably know about what happened here in Virginia with the Speaker of the House of Delegates trying to pass a rule change to allow for some virtual voting. But now, Nancy Pelosi has been pushing for this proxy voting. Describe what it entails, and then what are the real problems with this procedurally?
Well, what you have had is about 70 members of Congress who decided that they would rather stay in their districts and collect a paycheck. And so you've had a couple who have already tweeted. They were proxy voting yesterday, and yet they were down at the Kennedy Space Center to watch the aborted Elon Musk space launch. That's not what proxy voting is for. Proxy voting is for when you physically are incapable, as Nancy Pelosi has described it, physically incapable of making it to the House. But what it does is it abrogates your responsibility to represent your constituents. If you represent about 700,000 Americans and you're not able to come to vote on their behalf, they've got to ask, is this person fully doing the job that they were elected to do? And I would argue the answer is no. So we have sued on a number of us have launched a lawsuit to try and overturn this, because the Constitution is very clear that a quorum is necessary to do business, and the founders never intended for the quorum to be remote. They meant for elected officials to be there in person to vote.
All right. We have some questions from some people that are on the webinar. Do you still have some time here to answer a couple more questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So let's see. Let's go right out of the gate. The Trace Act has been introduced, and it reads as though it could allow the government to kind of go into homes and take, family members out to separate them because of COVID. Can you give us your thoughts on this bill and where it's at?
Sure. I don't think it's going anywhere, because I don't think there's any interest in that level of government control, that mandated tracing. So the bill, you're always going to have members of Congress on the far fringes who are introducing government control, and there's just not the support on either side of the aisle to pass that kind of legislation.
Okay. This is more kind of going back to the healthcare. Because of the pandemic, there's sort of a growing need for telemedicine and usage of it. What are the pros and cons of telemedicine, especially in the context of this pandemic?
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This is exciting because we're following live a congressman at work doing the work for the people. So this is a good experience for everyone.
Okay, sorry about that. I had to duck in and vote real quick and duck out.
Oh.
You've heard me huffing and puffing as we've made our way to the floor for a vote there. The proxy voting makes it, and the coronavirus make it a longer process than normal. But I was watching the clock tick down and realized I had to hustle to get there to vote. So I appreciate your patience.
Sure.
On telemedicine, you are seeing kind of a revolution in telemedicine, an investment in the types of programs that are definitely helping people get the health care they need through and during this coronavirus pandemic. Because when people can't leave their homes, when people can't get to a healthcare provider to either get a diagnosis as to whether they might have symptoms affiliated with the coronavirus, telemedicine provides that link, especially in rural areas like mine. It's a vital resource. So we have provided funding to encourage the use of telemedicine and to waive some of the Medicare, the barriers that are in place for Medicare providers to get reimbursed for telemedicine services. So hopefully that'll continue to expand and continue to ensure that telemedicine is used more regularly.
Okay. This next question is for a lot of families and a lot of students who are in college and in universities. Is there, well, what are you anticipating the financial impact to be, which I would think would be significant? And can you comment on those who've mentioned loan forgiveness?
Sure. So higher education is going to be facing a lot of challenges moving forward, not just in relation to making sure that students can go back to classes safely, but because of the increased use of classes online, which is something I've encouraged dating all the way back to my time in the House of Delegates, I think you're going to see a renewed skepticism of brick and mortar higher education. You're going to see a greater use of online services. You're going to see colleges and universities questioning whether they should be building that new dorm and how that new dorm should be built, how those classrooms should be built, how many they enroll. And that's going to extend all the way back to state legislators who are funding these things. A lot of our bonding went toward higher education construction. And I don't think that institutions of higher education are going to be able to justify the continued levels of spending on construction, on new programs that they once did. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think that kind of review is healthy and necessary because, quite frankly, higher education is too expensive. They're charging American families too much. Students are having to get indebted for decades just to make it through 4 years of college. That's not what higher education was supposed to be. And so I think it's a great time and a great revolution that's going to be occurring around higher education in the future.
Okay. Keeping it within the education context, and you had mentioned this early on about your how much fun you're having doing some homeschooling, as all families are doing that these days. There's always rumors of trying to ban homeschooling. You know, is there anything that you are aware of that you're working on to ensure that families have the ability to choose the best education format for their children?
Absolutely. Well, I think that the federal government should get out of the business of education. Education is not something that is a responsibility of the federal government. It's not in the Constitution, and it should be the responsibility of state and local governments and families, quite frankly, to make the decision that's right for their children. And so I have been working hard to get the federal government further out of education. I think that the challenge is not going to come from the federal government as much as it's going to, because we do have our Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, who is a supporter of homeschooling, who is a supporter of private schooling, who is making sure that there's a balance there between the public education system and freedom to educate your children in the private sector or at home as you see fit. But at the state level, I do worry that in the current situation in Virginia, you're gonna see overeager liberals in the Virginia legislature try and clamp down on the ability of families to homeschool their children and decide what's right for their for their families and for their kids. It's a scary time, and you've already seen it just this last session. So hopefully things will change, and we'll be able to slow efforts in that area by liberal legislators.
Okay. I have one final question, if you have time.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. So here in Virginia, you're probably aware that we have legislation that passed and was signed into law by the governor. The title of it is the Virginia Values Act, but essentially it deals with non-discrimination. And this is going to have a significant impact on churches, religious private schools. And in Congress, there's been a similar legislation with the Equality Act. And we know that there have been some crossover, some bipartisan support for that bill. It's hopefully not going to be taken up in the Senate. Of course, elections have consequences. But can you kind of share your thoughts about that bill, its impacts, and then any other comments you might have about that particular topic?
Yeah, I watched with concern the legislation as it progressed through the House at the Virginia legislature, and recognizing that it went far beyond even what many other liberal states had in their statutes. And so you have inevitable litigation that's going to result, because the intent of the patrons of this liberal legislation was to go into the churches and force the churches to adhere to their liberal social doctrine. And that's a clear violation of the interference of the government into the ability of a church and a people to exercise their faith. So clear violation of the First Amendment. And so I was pleased to see the litigation launched. I think that it's the right move. I'm glad to see the Family Foundation moving into launching its own legal action center. And so hopefully we'll see some victories come down the line in the Virginia courts, because that's not what Virginians want for their families, for their churches, and at the federal level, we are seeing a grand battle between our administration, which is standing up for families and standing up for the rights of families to raise their children and profess their faith, and those on the liberal left, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and others, who are pushing to continue to force families to adhere to certain definitions, certain rules that don't fit in with their beliefs or their upbringing. So we'll continue to see that battle happen at the federal level, and hopefully we'll see that battle successfully countered at the state level.
Well, Congressman, thanks to you and many of your colleagues. We know that you're standing on the front lines, standing up for families, for the important values, religious liberty and free speech and the sanctity of life. And we just appreciate the work that you're doing to defend those rights. And so we just want to say thank you for taking your time out of your day to answer some questions. These have been some exciting VIP chats, and your comments and the information you've been able to provide has been very helpful, very informational. So we just want to say thank you, and just so you know, we are always praying for our political leaders, regardless of political party. It's important that we lift them up in prayer. So just know that we'll be praying for you and your family during this time, and just ask that you stay safe and healthy during this ongoing pandemic.
Thanks so much, and thank you for your prayers. They definitely help. They are the best thing that folks can do for us. I pray for my speaker every day that she may see the light and realize the value of human life and the value of faith and family, and so those prayers work for not just for those who share your views, but also help those to change their views. So keep the prayers coming, and I'm greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with y'all today.
Thank you, Congressman. And with that, I'm going to go on ahead and hand it back over to Victoria Cobb, who will wrap us up for this VIP chat.
Well, I kind of wish we had been on an iPhone and we could have actually seen him run over and vote and hop in the elevator and all that good stuff. So didn't know we would move around so much, but it's kind of been a fun chance to get to know Congressman Cline and a little bit about what's going on at the federal level. Thank you so much. We're grateful for your service. Just as we wrap up, a couple quick announcements. Again, you don't want to miss the simulcast on Monday, and you don't want to miss telling your friends. So we put the website over there in the chat box. This is one you're going to want to pass around. So shoot out an email to your friends and neighbors about this opportunity on Monday. And if you're interested in sponsoring, to join that special sponsor, reach out to us through probably Marie at familyfoundation.org. And then the last thing is I came off an interview right before this about the 7th and what's happening in the 7th. And I thought I'd at least remind people it is an election year. We are in the middle of our C4 is running a campaign to hopefully return the 7th congressional district to a conservative. I don't know which yet because the convention doesn't happen until now, July. And there are lots of great folks competing on the Republican side. We know that Spamberger, our congresswoman, has had a terrible record on life in particular. And so we're hoping to get a pro-life representative to run against her. So we are hard at work, mostly hitting the phones because we're still not quite on doors. But we've got pastor trainings coming up. We've got an event coming up June 14th where we're just going to be getting together to kind of rally for the campaign. Might be one of our first in-person things in a while. So anyway, you can get a lot of that information on our website, familyfoundation.org. There's a link that's specific to what we do through our C4 Family Foundation Action. But I wanted to make sure I at least mentioned that indeed, don't forget that we are in an election season, and the Senate primary is coming up in June. And if you are not already aware, you need to be voting. I think it's the 23rd. I'm going to double check that, but it's the Tuesday that week. And for some of us, we're planning to be on vacation, so you better get your absentee thing squared away. So I just wanted to mention that before we walk out. Next week, go back home. You don't want to miss this. I'm telling you, he is an awesome creative mind for our movement, and he's going to help us with products that will teach us how to better defend what we believe as we walk out. And we're going to announce sort of our grassroots initiative that's going on in conjunction with that VIP chat. So have a great week. Thank you for joining us.